A lot of people are disappointed with GPT-5's performance in the API specifically. The promise was this will be cheaper and better. That's not what everyone is seeing right now. I think the reason is most people don't understand how it's supposed to be used, what kind of model GPT-5 falls under, and how it's built. So quick reminder and recap on all of these things. So this is the table for pricing and context window that we've seen 3 weeks ago for GPT-5 mini, nano, 4.0 mini, 4.1 mini, right? I'm not covering the main GPT-5 model or 4.1. This is for high volume use cases, which is what we're currently doing in Clay. And when we looked at pricing, most people focused on inputs more than outputs because the outputs we would get in Clay for these models were not that large, right? The inputs were much more significant. And this is what people cared about when it came to context window and pricing. The tokens were much more important on the input side because your inputs weren't that large. Because your outputs weren't that large. What we're seeing now, though, is you have to dive deeper into how the pricing is done. And output billing is a combination of not just how many tokens you have in your output, but how many reasoning tokens you have. Reasoning tokens didn't matter that much with 4.0 mini, 4.1 mini, because they are not reasoning model. And you can see this specifically when you look at how many tokens are used. And a token is just 3/4 of a word. That's the easiest way to approximate it. It's based on a number of characters. GPT-5 mini and GPT-5 nano, I think the way to think about them are in the reasoning model line of models. I think what a lot of people expected because of the naming structure is that this is what we would get, right? That GPT-5 would be over here because the nomenclature that makes sense. And this is why you had all the people on TikTok freaking out because their therapist disappeared, which was 4.0, right? It doesn't work the same on GPT-5. But what OpenAI has tried to do is get GPT-5 to be the best of both worlds, to be a general purpose model and a reasoning model. And that's why you have the flexibility to figure out it should be smart enough to know whether it should think harder or less, and you can control that on certain levels in the API. I think for simplicity, the easiest way to think about it is to think about GPT-5 as a reasoning model, in my opinion. Especially when it comes to pricing and tokens and that sort of thing. This is much more similar of a successor to O3 than it is to any of these models in general purpose. And once you think about it as a reasoning model, it comes to make sense why so many people are seeing much higher pricing. Yeah, GPT-5 is cheaper, right? If you compare GPT-5 mini to 4.1 mini, it's cheaper on the input. It is more expensive on the output, but no one really cared about the output that much. Once you factor in the reasoning tokens, that will allow this to skyrocket, and that's why you're seeing much more expensive pricing on a per cell usage basis for GPT-5 mini, even if you're not that impressed with the output, because you're being built on the reasoning, and there's so much more reasoning happening. Let me show you in Clay what this looks like. So this is the test. The way we're approaching this is we're taking 20 companies in here, and then companies that are right. There's Lumen here as an example. Mercury. There's some that are decently well known, and we're gonna ask a series of questions through prompts. We're gonna ask about recent news that's worth commenting on. We're going to ask about job hires. We're going to ask about investors that they have, and then we're going to ask to take all the variables it's pulled and put that into an email. We're going to do this separately for GPT-5 mini versus 4.1 mini. And the email will then use the specific variables that the GPT-5 mini email will use variables that GPT-5 mini found. 4.1 mini will use variables that 4.1 mini found, and we'll see what's the total cost at the end and how good is the final output. And then also specifically for each individual search, how good are each? Why 5 mini and 4.1 mini? This is what we use. At our volume context window we're given, this is our line. Well, we're in a place where we can run this at scale for mini versus nano. Nano is cheaper, but our volume is low enough to where we can get this done effectively. And you're watching this, your volume is probably at a point where I think mini will be reasonable to you versus someone like Eric
who has a 10K plus OpenAI bill and sends a million cold emails a month, right? Most likely, they're watching this, you're not sending a million emails a month. Let's have a look. So this is run through GPT-5 Mini specifically. You can see the prompt in here. It's the same exact prompt that's being asked afterwards to 4.1 Mini, which you can see here. Same process exactly, same prompt, but for 4.1 Mini. Let's look at first how it performs for finding noteworthy news. We have 20 columns here, and you can see that there's no noteworthy signal found for 13 out of the 20 results on 5.1. 4.1 finds 20 results, 20 for 20, not a single failure. When you dive deeper, what you're seeing is that the ones that 5 Mini is not able to find are all the signals that are in 2024, which is interesting, right? This is in 2024, could not be found here. This is a 2020. This is the only exception. Sorry, this is a 2024 result. As is this one. As is this one. None of them could be found here. We're still being billed for the lack of results, and it's interesting to me why that happens. I don't have a good answer for why GPT-5 Mini. Maybe with extra reasoning, it's determining that anything from 2024 is no longer recent. I can't tell if I'm happy or not happy with that. Maybe that's on the prompt to be more specific. If we run the comparison of pricing, so this is the GPT-5 Mini column, 0.003 versus 0.015. Let's compare some where they actually have the two results that are found. 0.002 versus 0.01. So GPT-5 Mini is cheaper. 0.001 versus 0.012. We are seeing almost across the board. Here's one where 4.1 Mini was actually cheaper. But overall, when you compare the trends, we're seeing less pricing for GPT-5 Mini, but also much more, I guess, disappointing results on the first test. Second test, can you find the main investors? This is the GPT-5 column Mini, sorry, GPT-5 Mini. This is the 4.1 Mini column. Find relevant investors for each of these companies. Overall, I was much more happy with the results here. And this time it was GPT-5 Mini that actually had the more complete results. It went 20 for 20 versus 19 for 20 here. Once you actually click in and see more results, you'll see the depth of it. But what we're seeing now we need to compare pricing. And the results are still cheaper for GPT-5 Mini. There are some where they're basically equal, right? 0093 versus 0098. This is another one that's close, you could say. But there are some where it's much, much less, right? 0.005 versus 0.01. The trend consistently across is that GPT-5 Mini is doing this at lower pricing than 4.1 Mini, which is the relevant comparison for what we're trying to evaluate at similar performance. Third test, can you find who they're hiring for? And if I jump into the prompts just so you can see this more in depth, right, where we're asking them to look from specific sources, we're asking them what pages to check, and we're giving them specific formatting as well for this. Same prompt for both again. This time they come basically neck and neck, where there's 13 or 14 results found for each. There's some interesting results found here. Both of them couldn't put together that Loom was acquired by Atlassian. If I actually jump into the response here, there's a redirection to Atlassian's career page, which is unrelated to Loom. It is related to Loom. So there are still mishaps. Even when you step up from the nano level to mini, there are still dumb things like this that will happen, which is interesting. But in terms of performance, then they came out to be pretty similar, actually. In terms of pricing, GPT-5 Mini is still cheaper than 4.1 Mini across the board when you compare them, sum them up, comparing them one by one. There are some that are close. There are some that are about half the price. which is interesting because it's different from the results you would see when you compare the nano model to 4.0 mini. We take all these inputs, and now this is the final moment, right? Like this is what we want to see, is what does the final email look like for 5 mini using 5 mini inputs and 4.1 mini using 4.1 inputs. So this is the most important piece. I'm gonna start from the top and compare some of these emails to each other. So, hey, congrats on the Reachy Mini launch. First of all, the AI M dash is dead in GPT-5 Mini in all of these emails. Versus if I click on the 4.1 equivalent, we still see right the no space typical AI dash. There's no custom instructions on this. It's the same one for both, but that was an interesting output. I think they've probably taken that feedback. It's becoming really obvious and then tried to mix it up. The trends I'm seeing, I'll click on another email here, is the 5 mini email. It has much more context and is using much more context into the email. And the context that we added here is that we want it to act as if there is a paper lead retainer model, paper lead model that they're offering to these companies. Zevenu is not a paper lead model. Don't get it twisted. This is just for the example that we're trying to run here. But that's the instructions that we're running in here for both. And then what I'm seeing is we're consistently seeing shorter copy for 4.1, but we're not getting the context in the way that I want it to be. Ironically, that actually makes it a better performing email. But in terms of just pulling in the context that we've asked it to do and say, okay, it's adding even additional stuff where we're saying we helped an interactive entertainment SaaS. Another example, it says we've worked with specific companies in this specific niche, which is like it's adding credibility there in a way that 4.1 isn't. So my subjective view is that 5 mini is doing a better job of pulling in the data that it's researched before and putting that into an email. In terms of pricing, the Mercer example, because that's the one where 5 mini and 4.1 mini did not fail a single one of the research tasks. And before showing you the pricing, I want to show you how the tokens look, because like I mentioned, the formula is output tokens evaluates reasoning as well. And you can see, right, 5,000 tokens, 3,800 input, 1,300 on output. Let's compare the input and the output. So 3,800 on 5 mini versus 4,670. Okay, so slightly more here, but there's virtually no output tokens, right? This is your output tokens right here. There's no reasoning compared to what 5 mini is doing, which is the formula for output billing is output tokens plus reasoning tokens as well. And there's so much reasoning that goes into this reasoning model. How does that look when you compare them both? Very, very close, right? 0.025 versus 0.029. In many of these other examples, the example's a little bit more stark, right? 0.014 versus 0.048. GPT-5 mini does consistently come under, but it is a little bit off because so many of these, this is the mini total cost, right? This is not the email cost. This is everything. Research plus the actual email that we've sent. And because there is a little bit of an asterisk because there is less, there are some columns where it wasn't able to pull, but you're still being billed on them anyways. So it's not that much of an asterisk, like, right? Like it's still fair to compare 5 mini and 4.1 mini here. And we are seeing that 5 mini does come in consistently cheaper across each of these. Here's one where 4.1 mini came out on lower price. But for the rest of these, for the most part, it's GPT-5 mini that comes in as the cheaper model. As a bonus, I ran everything else again on GPT-5 itself and then 4.1 itself as a model. I'm going to skip all of these things and just jump straight to the final performance to show you what that looks like. We're going to go back to the Mercer example. This is what we do, right? This is a much better email compared to what we were seeing previously. And 4.1 is also doing better than 4.1 mini is. Both of these emails, and this is the culmination of all the work that's happened, are performing better. If we compare pricing in this case, the conclusion is still the same. 5 is cheaper than 4.1. I'm including this in case you have, obviously it's much more expensive on 5 versus the mini and nano models, but you've heard how Nano compares. You've heard how many compares. If you have a lead list that's valuable to you and you want to run them on the actual top tier models, that like the best 4.1 model and the best 5 model, I wanted to show you what the output and pricing could look like for that too. The conclusions are the same. 5 mini is cheaper in most cases. Here's one where it's not. But as you scroll through, you'll see for nearly all of these, 5 mini is coming in cheaper. And when we look at the emails that we're getting as a result, I was personally still more impressed by the research that GPT-5 was able to incorporate into the email than what the 4.1 email was. Like this email, when I read this, like it's saying, okay, you're growing, let's help you, which is also what this is doing, but it's tying it in specifically, right? Like we help your specific types of teams do this, and we also help the similar ML platform do this too. I like that. Anyways, these are the conclusions. Let me know, especially if there are ML experts who are watching this, if my take on this is right. This is my assessment after reading through the documentation and sitting in the forums for a while and trying to reverse engineer why the pricing works the way it does. We are incorporating 5 mini into our process. Let me know what you think.